Hello, everybody. Welcome back to class. Hope you guys are doing great and having a nice week to this point. We've got about 6.5 minutes, and then we're going to just jump right into our meeting today. So I hope you guys have been good since Monday. Just give us about 6 minutes, and I'll be right with everybody. Hi, Chelsea. How's it going? Good to see you. One second. Just give myself a little beverage. Hey there, Allie, John, and all the rest. Good to see you guys. Just a few of us for the moment, but everyone will be arriving shortly, so good to get your seat. Nice. Hello, hi Danny, Brenda. Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, Nick. Hey, Dylan. Good afternoon. Nice to see you there. It's a nice day over here in Long Beach. The sun is shining out, so always appreciate good weather. Hey, Stacy. All right, just hang in there. Got about 3 minutes, then we'll get rolling. Hey, Margarito, how's it going? Peachy. Peach? Just running around here somewhere. Eddie. And Ailey. Niall, maybe. Cool. Hey, Hannah. Hi, Danny. Ashley, good to see everybody. Hey, Charisse, Vanessa, and all the others. Welcome back. Hey there, Bonnie. Hey there, Cecilia. Good to see you too. So just a couple moments, another minute and a half. Sunny, Emily, Cecilia, good to see all you guys. All right. Almost there. Hey, Diego, Nancy. Hi there, Haley. Hello. Hey, Gary. Hi, Ray. What's up, Megan? Good to see you guys. And hello, Amanda. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. It's pretty much now 1 p.m. So as usual, I'm going to get us started. Thanks again for your attendance and all of your hard work so far throughout the semester. So basically today, we're just going to kind of continue to expand on the topic that we were mentioning last time. What are arguments? What are some of the different types of arguments? We're going to get a little more familiar with some of the different forms of deductively valid argument. So I know last time we spoke about what's the difference between induction and deduction. So we're going to kind of review those topics again, just kind of brush up and remind ourselves about what those ideas are. And then we will dive into more detail on the concept of deduction. We'll learn today about a couple of different forms of deductively valid argument. We will learn 4 different forms of deductively valid argument. So that's like the main substance of today's meeting. Also today, this is key. I'm going to send off the first homework assignment to you guys. I'll also just notify you here in verbally in the class lecture. But after I'm done with the lecture a little later today, I will send you the same info about what workbook exercise to do to complete your first homework, which is going to be due next Wednesday. So anyways, if anybody here hasn't yet tapped into our live chat just to sort of record your presence, please do that. As you know, in case you have a different screen name than your official name on my roster, just note it in the chat. Like, for example, Diane, thank you for letting me know. And anyways, I see everybody here, so thanks a lot. That's just my little records on the side about attendance, should I ever need to go back and look at them. Okay, well, welcome back. Thanks, guys. So let me just go over some of the things that we've already talked about and kind of bring you back up to speed again. It's a class in critical thinking. Good critical thinkers don't believe things unless they're based on good evidence or arguments. When they make claims to other people, they provide good evidence and arguments to defend their own views. Bad critical thinkers will believe stuff whether or not it's based on a good argument or any kind of good evidence. And bad critical thinkers of the world don't have the ability to really justify or back up their beliefs very well with solid reasoning or evidence or argument. So we want to be the better critical thinkers. We talked about, cases of who could be considered good or bad on both sides. After that, we mentioned what are arguments, okay? And so arguments, as you probably remember, are just a set of 2 or more sentences where one of the sentences is the conclusion of the argument, and everything aside from that, the other sentences are all the premises. In talking about premises and conclusion, the parts of an argument, the conclusion part is the statement, the sentence that you're trying to prove to be true. Okay, so you're trying to convince, persuade, show that the conclusion statement of the argument is true. And the premises, they relate to the conclusion because they are the evidence that backs the conclusion up. There has to be at least one premise statement. There's no such thing as an argument which is just one sentence by itself. So I hope you guys remember that if I told you, I don't know, we should pass the COVID relief bill. That statement by itself is not an argument, but because there's no reasons given to support the claim. but we could construct an argument towards this conclusion if we wanted to. We could say, okay, here's a premise. People are out of work. We need to get the vaccination campaign up and running. These things require urgent funding that can only be appropriated by the government. Therefore, we should pass the COVID relief bill. But there I've given an argument instead of merely stating the claim with no evidence to support it. Okay, now let's remember this key term. As I've said, the point of an argument is to show that the conclusion is true. So what does it mean when a statement is true? Maybe someone will just tell me that one. I know we've reviewed it already, but I just kind of think this is key and important. So let's see who can tell me one last time, or well, not the last time, but one more time. What does it mean when a statement's true? What's that definition for us? To have a true sentence, a true, sometimes they call it proposition. What is this? And I'll just see what you've got in your memory or just your knowledge now. Well, Nick, come on. I said, what does it mean when it is true? So I think you must be confused, Nick. What do you mean? When what doesn't match reality? When the statement doesn't match reality, that's when it's false. That's obvious to you, right? Like, tell me, am I wearing glasses? Is that a true statement or not? It's true because it does match reality. I mean, something that doesn't match reality is fake. It's not correct. Like if somebody told you you were born from the stork, like the stork dropped you off at your parents' house, that's not true because that sentence doesn't match reality. Okay, good, Nick. When the meaning of the statement, when whatever the sentence says matches the facts of reality, correct? Okay, everybody's clear on this, right? Yeah, well, maybe you heard me say, what does it mean when it's not true? In that case, you would have had the right answer. But everybody, we're not confused, right? What does it mean when a sentence is true? When whatever the sentence says matches the actual facts of reality. So if I told you that, you know, I'm holding a pig right now, that's not correct. That's not true. I am holding a cat, and that's true. So one of the statements matches what's real. The other one doesn't. So we got to remember that. That's important. Now, what's a belief? A belief is just when somebody thinks that a statement is true. So, you know, you probably believe that we're the third planet from the sun because that's a statement, and you think that's physically the real situation of reality. So sometimes people believe one sentence that other people don't believe, and that's when debate and argument kind of ensues. Here's something I kind of wanted to go over again, and we talked also about, you know, Peachy's always getting up in here, so if she keeps jumping up too much, Peachy, be a good girl, then I may have to put her over to the next room. Or I might have to just sort of put her down there. She's good. You're going to be good, Peach? Okay. Yeah, so we talked about conclusion indicator words. There are words like therefore, thus, hence, so, consequently, it follows that. These are all words that indicate that the next statement is the conclusion of the argument. And there are also premise indicator words. Those are words like because, since, given that, due to the fact that. And these words indicate that you're now hearing one of the reasons or premises that lead toward the conclusion of the argument. Different types of sentences: assertoric, imperative, interrogative, exclamatory. All right. From there, we talked about deduction and induction. So this is me now trying to remind you about the subjects from the previous meeting on Monday. So there's two main types of argument and reasoning in logic and in critical thinking. One type are inductive reasoning, and one is deductive reasoning. Let's start with our review of deduction quickly. So when you have a deductively valid argument, that's what it is when you have a good deductive argument. So what does it mean? Who knows this? What does it mean if an argument is deductively valid? Deductively valid argument. Let's see. Let's go back into that for a moment, because this is fundamental for today's lesson too. We're going to talk more about the concept of validity and expand on it. Okay, so good, Chelsea. If all the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true. Absolutely, yes. That's the right definition. So with a deductively valid argument, the case is this. If we assume those are true premises, then the conclusion would have to be true as well. Now, Blake, you didn't write it correctly. You say all the premises, but there's no statement about what they have to be. It says if all the premises are true, to be specific, then in that case, the conclusion must also be true. But we have to make sure that when we write this out, we're not just trying to remember the random words that we saw in the notes, but that we understand the concept. In case all the premises are true, it would imply that the conclusion must be also. Okay, so like, I don't know. All people born in the US are citizens. Obama was born in Hawaii. So therefore, what would you deduce from those premises? Just kind of spinning off an example randomly from the top of my head, but there's a clear conclusion that would follow from those two statements. And you can let me know in the chat here what that could be. All people born in the United States are citizens. Obama was born in Hawaii, so therefore, thus, hence, follows that, consequently, ergo, that Obama is a US citizen. Okay. Okay, so like, again, imagine that these two premises are true, then this conclusion has to be as well, because this conclusion just is the result of these two premises. You know, let it be that these are the people born in the US, and these are the number of people that are citizens, because it's a larger circle, since some people can be naturalized citizens, you know, that have taken their oath. Well, here's Obama, born in the USA, therefore he's a member of the category born in the US. All members of that category are also citizens of the United States, so he's a citizen. That's a valid argument. And, you know, any number of arguments can be constructed along the same lines. When the first premise is something that says all of a certain kind of thing have a particular feature, and then you identify in another following premise one member of that category, then it would follow that that person also has the same feature. Okay? Now, let me show you another example so that we can review the concept of soundness one time. Okay? How about this? Okay, says all women have long hair. Second premise, Ellen is a woman. Yeah. What would be our conclusion in this case? Not too hard, I think. All women have long hair. Ellen is a woman. So what would be the conclusion that would follow from those premises? What statement? Okay, that Ellen has long hair. Good. Okay, so now I'm kind of testing your understanding of another concept. I want to ask you a quick question here. What's the status of the argument on the board here with regards to the terminology that we've all learned a little bit of? What kind of argument is this? Classify what kind of argument that is. Who can tell me? Okay, Margarito, you say it's unsound. Good. But there's another thing I want to make sure we get clear. Even though it's not sound, it is what? It's valid but not sound. Very good, Brenda. Now, many of you have noticed that it's unsound, and that's correct. But I don't want you to mistake and overlook the fact that it is valid. It's a valid argument. Why is it valid? Let me hear somebody tell me the reason why this argument's valid. It's not sound, and that's true. It's not sound because for an argument to be sound, all the premises have to be really factually true. So, two questions, okay? Number one, why is it valid? And number two, why isn't it sound? Which part of the argument makes it not sound? That's one question. Separate question, what makes this argument overall valid? Okay, so let's see if anyone can try to report that to me. Give me the reason why it's not sound, and give me the reason why it is valid. Both can be clearly stated. Okay, it's unsound because not all women have long hair. Correct, exactly. Not all women do have long hair, that's obvious. For example, Ellen. But it's valid though, okay? Let's get into that. Why does it still count though as valid? Yvonne, you noticed that it's valid, and that's true. So, correct. It's valid because it logically makes sense, you say, Ray, but unsound because of premise one. Okay, now I understand what you mean. It does logically make sense, but we have to be a little more precise in the use of terms. So for it to be valid, it means that the form of the argument is such that if the premises are true, if they're true, right? Like if we just imagine these to be true, then this would have to just result from those two statements. So just thinking about the information content here, this piece of information is a logical consequence of these two pieces of information, disregarding the fact that none of those, well, this thing is not true. Okay, so this one is valid but not sound. What about the last one, though, that I gave about Obama and everything? Well, that one is both valid and sound, because if you check through the premises, they're all true. And on top of that, yes, the conclusion is a logical consequence of the premises there. Okay? Come on, Peachy. She's like so desperate for attention right now, but anyway, we'll get through this meeting. So yeah, now I want to ask you one other question really fast, because I want this to make perfect sense to everybody, okay? How about this? So here's an argument. It says, first of all, Dr. Vulich is a man. Therefore, Dr. Vulich is a professor. What about that argument? Tell me if you can. Is this argument valid, yes or no? Let's see if you can think carefully, but tell me what you do think. Do you think this is a valid argument, or is it not valid? Okay, Diego, good. Good, also Danny and Margarito. Correct, it's not valid. All right, now why is it not valid? Now, keep in mind, these statements are both true. It's a fact. I am a man, and I am a professor. Nonetheless, it's not a valid argument. Why not? Because, well, no, Haley, that's not the reason. An argument can have one premise. An argument cannot have 0 premises, but it can have 1, 2, 3, or any number greater than or equal to 1. Well, Margarito, you say not enough info. I don't know how to parse that, perhaps. The second part you say is that they don't correspond. Correct, in a way. That's a good way to think about it, and I'll expand on your point here. The form for the argument is wrong, you say, Brenda. Well, sure, but why? Danny, it's not valid because the fact that you are a man does not link up with the fact that you're a professor. Okay, that's along the right lines, and that's on the right track. Let me put it as much as I can precisely. That's also good, Derek. Not all men are professors. So, yes, I'm a man, but being a man does not imply that I'm a professor, okay? So let's go back in time, okay, before I ever became a professor. I've been a man the whole time. If I wanted to, I could have chosen anything else to do with my life. Sometimes I think about those other options, but I'm glad with the way things have worked out. Nonetheless, maybe I would have been the musician. Maybe I would have been the high school teacher. Maybe I would have been the, I don't know, just a retail salesperson in some company. So just from the fact that I'm a man, this does not logically follow. In other words, isn't it possible to imagine a possible world where this is true and this is false? It's easy to imagine that possibility. Just imagine like a different script for reality, where Dr. Vulich never became a professor. Maybe he became a medical doctor or something like that, okay? So what I'm telling you is, when you evaluate validity, you cannot just look at the premises and the conclusion and say, well, are they true or not? And if they are, then it's valid. In this case, both statements are true, but it's not valid, because although they are true, it remains logically possible for this to be true. In other words, for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. Okay? On the other hand, sometimes you can have valid arguments where all the statements are false. Like if I say all human beings were born on Mars, let's see, Peachy is a human being and therefore she was born on Mars. That's a valid argument, but both of the premise statements are false. It's not true that every person was born on Mars. It's also not true that my cat Peach is a human. But if we accepted those or granted those two premises, then logically speaking, the conclusion would be the valid conclusion to draw from that. Okay, so want to also now remind us about induction, and then we're going to continue with some new notes. So now think about this. What's an inductively strong argument? Maybe someone will remember this too. Inductively strong, meaning what? Now we're off of deduction for a moment, and we're talking about the other type of main reasoning structure. So what does an inductively strong argument mean? I'm sure you know, so I'll just hang in there for a bit, and let's see if you can tell me. What do you think? Okay, Brenda, so you're saying if all the premises are true, then the conclusion is highly likely to be true. Good. Yes, that's the exact definition of inductively strong. So inductively strong arguments. I don't know, like for example, the US has had a presidential election every 4 years since, well, like, I mean, since the founding. I can't remember when the first election was. I know the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, but I'm not sure if I remember the date and time at which Washington took office. But nonetheless, the US has had a presidential election every 4 years for over 200 years of history. Okay, so if we've had a presidential election every 4 years without fail, going way back into the 1700s, then what might be our inductively strong conclusion to induce from this premise? What do you think then? Good, I like you guys' help giving the definition, and that's all good. Nick, Jay, Brenda, Margarito, Danny. But I'm just asking if you fish around and think about what might be the conclusion I'm after here. We've had an election every 4 years going back hundreds of years. So therefore, what would be a safe conclusion might one draw from this? Inductions about patterns that have existed, and then they usually assert that the pattern will continue in the next instance. So more elections will follow every. That's a little bit too much though, Margarito, because when you say more elections, like plural, you're talking about an indefinitely extensive range of things into the future. Usually you want your induction to only lead us to the claim of one event happening. So there will be another election in 4 years. Good. So in 2024, there will be a presidential election. Okay, now, this is inductively strong. Why? Because we're not just saying, well, we had a presidential election once, and so maybe we'll have another one. We're talking about something that's happened repeatedly in a 4-year cycle, going through hundreds of years, centuries of history. So with that much of a pattern in the past, it seems like this is not going to stop in the next available instance. But of course, can we guarantee that this is true just because of the long pattern of history? It's not absolutely immune from the possibility of turning out to be false. But that's how induction works. Induction gives you premises that lead you to a conclusion that is most likely going to be true based on the premises. But unlike with deduction, where it's literally impossible for the conclusion to be false if we assume the truth of the premises, with induction, there's at least some possibility that the conclusion could nonetheless turn out false, even if the premises are true. We have to rely on induction. I mean, we do that all the time. You know, like I've never been shot in my life, and that means that when I leave the house, I don't expect to be shot on a given day. So we form expectations of what things will happen based on our prior experiences. But in life and through prior experience, we know that sometimes the pattern can be disrupted, unexpected things, random things can sometimes occur. So induction cannot guarantee the conclusion if the premises are true, but it shows us that it's very likely, okay? Let me see if anybody else can throw out an example of an inductively strong argument, just while we're on this topic for a moment. So come up with one of your own if you can. Think of some of the examples that I have given you. The sun has come up for billions of years, so it'll come up tomorrow. We've had a presidential election every 4 years for hundreds of years, so there will be one in 2024. Every time I've turned on my car, the car started. So when I turn it on today, it will start. You know, I've never broken a bone so far, so I won't break one today, and that's over 30 years of life. So maybe you've got something on your mind that you can put in there. So I can see that, you know, you could work with this concept a little bit. It's not too hard, you know, just provide the premises and then tell me what conclusion you think could reasonably be drawn, but not with total certainty from those premises. Take a valedictorian, they've had an A in every class throughout their entire high school, so they'll get an A in this class if they're like a senior and you're looking at their progress during that year. So anyway, I'm just throwing out more and more examples, but let's see what comes out in our chat here. something that's bound to happen again, pretty much, because it has happened that same way in the past. So let me know. You know, another example, as I'm on the topic, could be like athletic performance. Say that there was a sports team that had dominated for like a long time. Here's an example. I don't know, you guys, do you know anything about tennis? So Rafael Nadal, he's like the greatest ever on clay. And he's won the French Open, I think, 13 times. So at one point, I think it was like a streak of 5 in a row, interrupted only by 1 match loss. So you could say he's won it 13 times in a row, so he'll win it next year. But of course, performance can't be guaranteed. It's just something that we look at as a pattern that's reasonable. Here I see a few examples, okay? So Dimitri, my laptop is turned on and worked for the past 2 years. So therefore, my laptop will turn on and work tomorrow. Good. That's a good example. Now, we all know that eventually, sometimes, you know, like all of a sudden it dies out of nowhere, even when it's been reliable for a long time. That's happened to me with my old MacBook. But we have a reasonable expectation if it's been reliable over a duration of time. Here we go. Danny, every morning I go to the park every Thursday of the week. Well, this is a little confusing. Every morning's more than just Thursday, but you know, let's say every week I go to the park on Thursday, so I will not most likely go to the park next Thursday. It's a good example, but I would just add a couple of details to make it a bit more clear. You could have mentioned how long you've held this pattern of going to the park on Thursdays, and that would add strength to the argument depending on how long that has gone on. So you could say, I've gone to the park on Thursdays every Thursday for 5 years, so I will go this week. Me, I'm like an avid runner. I've run every day this year except for January the 1st, January the 6th, and February the 1st. So I've taken 3 days off. So like sometimes I get on a real streak. I've run over 100 days in a row. And you could say, oh, he's run the past 75 days, so he'll run tomorrow. That would be like another example. Okay, the NFL has had a Super Bowl game played every year. Well, let's be precise. Not every year, like going back to the 1500s, but since maybe whatever, mid-1950s or something. So there will be one this year. Okay, Tom Brady, I mean, what? He keeps making the Super Bowl. So, this is his 10th appearance. You could say Tom Brady has appeared in previous Super Bowl and 9 other occasions, so he'll get there this year. Is it a good bet? It seems like it's more reasonable than not based on the pattern we've seen. Yvonne, there's always traffic on the 101 in the morning, so there'll be traffic this morning. Fair enough. Amanda, I have not caught the flu in over 3 years, so you won't catch the flu this year. Good, and I hope that you don't catch it. We all hope that. Of course, if you have a robust record of clean bill of health, then you might assume it'll continue on. Induction gives us something to rely on, but we can't say it's always going to be this conclusion will turn out true. Okay, good. Thanks, guys. So I just wanted to make sure everything there was clear enough. So now let's go on. And I have to tell you now about what are 4 different forms of deductively valid argument. So when we're dealing with deductively valid arguments, there's been forms of deductively valid argument that have been identified throughout the centuries and throughout the years. So once you know the form of a deductively valid argument, then you can use that same form to construct innumerably many examples of that kind. Let me give you like one random example, okay? So if I say to you that all A's are B's, okay, first premise, and A and B are just like variables. They're just placeholders for some information about a class of things. So all members of A are members of B. Suppose second premise continues by saying that some individual X is an A. All right? What would be the conclusion in this case, just using the jargon that you see here on the board? If all A's are B's, and also X is an A, then it logically follows, therefore, that what? See in the chat what you can tell me about this current argument. So, good. Then X is a B. That's very good. Right, so like this is a set of A's. All A's are B's, so B contains A. And if X is a member of A, then X is also contained by this set B, which subsumes A within its scope. So look, we could plug in now for the letters A, B, and X, and we could generate infinitely many valid arguments based on this scheme, this format. I could say all dogs are brown. Rover is a dog, therefore Rover is brown. I mean, that would be valid but not sound because the first premise made a false claim about all dogs. But it would still be valid just because, logically speaking, it would adhere to the sort of the logical structure given in this form. All men are born on Earth. Elon Musk is a man, so he was born on Earth. Yet another example, and on and on and on. All U.S. presidents are U.S. citizens. Joe Biden is the U.S. president, so Joe Biden is a U.S. citizen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's just me opening the discussion of what the form of a deductively valid argument looks like. It's going to have these like letters in place of actual statements that could occupy those variables. So here we go. 4 forms of deductively valid argument. Okay. So first of all, one of these 4 forms of deductively valid argument is what we call the hypothetical syllogism. Okay, so one of these is hypothetical syllogism. And the hypothetical syllogism, I use the wrong terminology. There are hypothetical syllogisms. There's also a disjunctive syllogism. So I had intended to speak of disjunctive, but since I wrote this, we're going to go straight into this one first. We would have covered them all anyway, not to worry. Okay, hypothetical syllogism. Now, hypothetical syllogisms are called hypothetical syllogisms for 2 reasons. First of all, the word syllogism just refers to a valid argument, a deductively valid argument that has 2 premises which lead to the conclusion. Okay, so that's what it is for it to be a syllogism, to have 2 premises and to be valid. Hypothetical syllogism means that it involves what's called a hypothetical statement. So a hypothetical sentence is a type of sentence. It's sometimes also referred to as a conditional sentence. And so in essence, a hypothetical or / conditional is really just an if-then statement. Okay, so like, let me show you an hypothetical. Something like this: if A, then B, for some A and B. So like, if I run, then I will sweat. If I fall off my bike, then I will hurt my knee. If I study, then I will get an A. You know, so these are all just various examples that could fit the format you see here, if A, then B. Now, with a hypothetical sentence, there are 2 parts to it. So a little more terminology here. The if part of the hypothetical, the if clause, goes by this name, antecedent. Okay, the antecedent of the conditional, the antecedent of the hypothetical is the if statement. The other part, which is the then clause, is called the consequent. So the if portion, antecedent. The following then portion is known as the consequent. Well, Harry, your question, how can a syllogism only have 2 premises? Yes, I mean, for the most part. We're going to at least discuss one type of hypothetical syllogism that permits for additional premises beyond 2. But yeah, in general, they only have 2. So back to this. The antecedent is the if part, and the consequent is the then part. So if I told you that if I fall from the ceiling, if I fall off the roof, then I'll die. The antecedent, meaning what comes first, is me falling. And the consequence from that event, like what results from it, is my death. It's kind of a morbid example, but if I study, then I will pass. The antecedent event is my studying, and the consequence that results from it is me passing the class. So we think in hypothetical terms all the time. Like, if I take this class, will I pass? You know, you ask it as a question. Sometimes you think, you know, if I drink this glass of alcohol, then I will have a hangover, right? So the drinking of it is the antecedent. The consequent is whatever after effects follow from that. Okay, so now knowing what a hypothetical is, right, I'm going to show you the different hypothetical syllogisms. So there are 3 of them really that we're going to learn about, and they all have different names. So they're members of the hypothetical syllogism family. These are 3 different versions of hypothetical syllogism, all right? The first one is called modus ponens. Modus ponens. M-O-D-U-S, so not a common word, it's taken from Latin. Ponens, P-O-N-E-N-S, okay? Now here's how modus ponens looks on the page. We have 2 premises that lead to the conclusion below. The first premise of modus ponens is a conditional, it's a hypothetical, and it just says, if A, then B. Okay, now the second premise of modus ponens continues from the first by saying that A, the antecedent, is true. Okay, if A, then B. Furthermore, A is the case. So if we have these 2 givens, that if A, then B, and also A is true, then what follows? Hopefully, pretty straightforward assessment here. If A, then B, and yeah, A happened, so then, therefore, what? We have this if-then statement. We add to that A is true, and so you'll tell me then what follows from those 2 facts. The conclusion of the modus ponens. Wait for it, but not forever. Let me know. What is the conclusion? It's really not too bad. I mean, if A, then B, and now you're knowing A, so it's pretty straightforward. Therefore, B. Good. All right. So, for example, if I run, then I will sweat. Now, let's say I do run. I ran. So, therefore, I sweated. I mean, it's just that straightforward. This claims that if certain event were to happen, something would follow from it. Something would then be the result of it, a consequence of it. If we continue by then stating that A did in fact occur and it was true, then whatever the consequence is that comes from A is our logical conclusion. Okay, so like if I study, I will pass. I did study, so therefore I will pass. How about let's go with a little geographic example. If I'm in California, then I'm in the United States. Is that a fair statement? I think it is. If I'm in California, I'm in the United States because it's a part of the United States. So let's go on and say, well, okay, and by the way, I'm in California. So what follows from those 2 statements is that I'm in the US, because if I'm in California, I'm in the US, and I am in California. So therefore, I'm in the US, right? And this is a valid form of argument, because if these 2 statements are true, this just has to be true. If it's a correct fact that A leads to B, then any assertion of A means that B, the consequence, will or has happened. Okay, so modus ponens is the name of this argument format, and we can plug in any number of possible pieces of content for A and B. You know, like I say, if I fall off my bike, then I'll hurt my knee. I fell off my bike, so therefore I hurt my knee. If I cheat on the test, then I will fail out of school, and I cheated, so I failed out of school, right? So just thinking of an if-then statement, entertaining the truth of the antecedent part, this leads us to the truth of the consequent part. Now, there's a sort of secondary name of modus ponens. Modus ponens is like its formal title that goes back thousands of years. But it's sometimes also known by this side name, which is affirming the antecedent. Okay, so like, let me put that, let me just create a little more room here. So it's sometimes also known as affirming the antecedent. And why is it also called affirming the antecedent? Well, because of what is going on premise 2. Premise 2 affirms the antecedent, namely A, the first part of the conditional. So that's why it's called affirming the antecedent. We have a conditional, we then affirm the antecedent, and that leads us to the conclusion, the consequent. If I don't lock my bike will get stolen. I didn't lock my bike, and therefore it did get stolen. True story. My bike got stolen from my own property because I didn't lock it up, even though it was within my balcony space. So hey, that can happen. But I'm just, riffing on like real life examples that can be given as variations on this one form. Okay, so hopefully this is coming clear into focus. There's a form of deductively valid argument which can then be utilized across infinitely many examples that can be plugged in consistently for the letters A and B there. Now here's something that I want to kind of correct if anyone ever makes this mistake. It's a common mistake, and so I want to try and ward you off of this error because it's something that students will sometimes do when they're learning this for the first time. So like say a quiz or something happens later, which will happen, and I ask you a question like, what is modus ponens? Write down an example. Sometimes a student will write it incorrectly, and let me show you what is an incorrect way of putting this, okay? So this is the right thing. This is how it should look. If A then B, A, therefore B. This would not be correct though. So if A, then B, B, therefore A. This is incorrect. This is not valid. That's not valid. Okay, so it's not affirming the consequent. It's affirming the antecedent. On the second premise, it's specific. It has to be the antecedent statement that is being affirmed here. Affirming the consequent is invalid, and that's a fallacious argument. For example, look at plugging in for A and B in this incorrect version. If I'm in California, then I'm in the United States, okay? Clear enough? Suppose I add to that, I'm in the United States. Does it follow that I'm in California? No, because it could be that I'm in the United States, but I'm in one of the other 49 states. So it works the other way around though, because everywhere in California is a part of the US. So being here means that you're also there. But not everywhere in the US is a part of California. So from the fact that I'm in the general country, it does not logically follow that I must be in California. So that would not be valid because it's possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. And if it's a valid argument, it's never possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. Okay, so just know that if you were to say this as modus ponens, you would not get the credit because this is not correct, but that's a common mistake. So I'm just trying to let you know about it so that you can identify this as an error and prevent yourself if you have any temptation to write it that way from making that error. Okay, like there's one example from the book that I thought was kind of funny. Someone says, if I'm smoking marijuana, then I'm breaking the law. And then suppose they say, I am breaking the law, therefore I'm smoking marijuana. That doesn't follow, right? Because you can be breaking the law a million different ways, and not just by smoking marijuana. So from the fact that smoking marijuana is like illegal in some federal sense, it doesn't follow that every time you break the law, that's the crime that you're committing. So of course, if it were A leading us to B, then it would have been a valid argument. Okay, so just a few little explanations, the correct form of modus ponens, and then the most common error that is made when people write it incorrectly. Okay, so you don't want to do this. I write it and I'm crossing it out to make it very clear visually that this is not what you're ever supposed to be writing down and it's not the right version of modus ponens. Okay, so far so good. If there's ever any more clarifications, something you want me to repeat, explain again, just feel free to do that in the chat. But for now, I think we know enough about modus ponens. We're going to move to the next hypothetical syllogism form. Okay. Maybe I should make this plural because we're learning more than one of the hypothetical syllogisms. So modus ponens is one of them, probably the most well-known. Another, though, is kind of like its sibling, modus tollens. So we're learning about all the members of the hypothetical syllogism family. We started with modus ponens, now we learn about modus tollens. Now modus tollens is another valid syllogism that has two premises and that uses a hypothetical statement. And so it begins the same way as modus ponens does, in this way. If A, then B. But from there, it takes a different direction, okay? So the second premise of modus tollens, instead of affirming A, denies B. So second premise says not B. Not B. Okay, so let's combine these two pieces of information and see if you can draw the conclusion correctly. If A, then B, but not B. okay, not B. B didn't happen. B isn't true. If A were true, then B would be. But B is false, not B. So what's the conclusion? What would we deduce from those two statements? If A, in that case, then B, but not B. Okay, very good. So therefore not A, exactly. So let me just kind of like make sure the logic of this kind of comes clear to you. Correct, everybody. Very good. Not A is the answer, and that's the conclusion of modus tollens. Now let me give you some examples plugging in on A and B. We said that if I run, then I will sweat, and that's also true of me. I mean, everyone, I guess, sweats when they run, but I really get into it. So if I run, then I'll sweat. Now I'm not sweating, so that means that I didn't run. Okay, right? Because had I ran, then I would have been sweating. So knowing that this consequence has not occurred also means, like reasoning backwards, that whatever would have led to that consequence did not occur either. Okay, so like if I fell off the Empire State Building, I would be dead, but I'm not dead, and therefore you know that one thing that didn't happen was whatever that event would have led to that outcome. So therefore, it's clear that I did not fall off the Empire State Building. Let's go back into the whole geography example. That one I always think is very clear and easy to understand. If I'm in California, then I'm in the United States. But suppose right now I'm not in the United States. Doesn't that imply logically that I'm not in California? Clearly, yes, because if you're not in the entire nation that California is a part of, then clearly you're not in the California part either. Okay, so when you have an if-then, and you can deny or negate the consequent in the second premise, then that implies the falsehood, the denial of the antecedent. Okay, and this one also has like a little AKA side name. Once again, modus tollens is this kind of like formal title going back thousands of years using the language of Latin. But sometimes informally we say of it that it's called, and I guess once again, oops, just gonna create more room here. The side name of this is denying the consequent. Okay, so denying the consequent, hopefully we can see why that's the name of it also, because that's the second premise, what it does. In the second premise of modus tollens, we take this consequent and we deny it. We say no, not B. And that's what puts us in position to deduce that not A. If Trump had won the election, then he would be the president right now. But Trump's not the president, so he did not win the election. You know, so I'm just giving you examples, just freestyling some of them off the top of my head, but we could do that all day. I mean, for any A and B, if you plug them in consistently in the way shown in this form, then that's going to be a valid instance of modus tollens. Okay? Now, there is a common mistake that will sometimes also be made when it comes to reporting on modus tollens. Okay, so like, let me show you about that. I talked to you about a common error with modus ponens, which is affirming the wrong clause on premise 2, affirming consequence to the antecedent. The problem with modus tollens that most students make if they make an error, okay, so this is correct. Now I'm going to erase it one time and just show you the incorrect mistake that sometimes gets made that I'm trying to help you not make. Okay, so suppose the student was asked, write down modus tollens or a version of modus tollens, and then they did this. So they start off with if A, then B, and that's good enough, no problem there. But suppose that now they continue by negating the wrong thing, and they say not A. So therefore not B. No, this is not valid, and that is incorrect, because the second premise is denying the wrong clause. It's denying the antecedent rather than the consequent. And because of this, it's not a valid argument. For example, if I'm in California, then I'm in the United States. I'm not in California. Does that mean that I'm not in the US? No. No, it doesn't, because I could be like in Oregon or something. And in that case, both of these are still true, but this is false. You know, that would be a situation where if I'm in California, then I'm in the United States, because sure, California's part of it. Say I'm not in California right now, I could still be in one of the other 49 states. So it doesn't work to negate it in this order and reach the reverse conclusion, all right? If I run, then I will sweat. Now I'm not running. And you might think, oh, doesn't that mean that I'm not sweating? Well, I could still be sweating because I'm doing something else, like lifting weights or whatever. So running is one way to get you to sweat. But just knowing that that's not happening right now doesn't eliminate all other possible actions that could have led to the same consequence. But of course, if you're not sweating, then that makes sure that any actions whatsoever, inclusive of running, didn't happen. Otherwise, you would have been sweating. Okay, so it's denying the consequent, folks. That's why this is not right, because in this version, it's denying of the antecedent, and that's why I've drawn this X through the form. Okay, so far we're learning some things. Modus ponens, modus tollens. These are two members of the hypothetical syllogism family of valid argument forms. They start off the same way, but they differ in the way they continue. With modus ponens, it is the antecedent that is affirmed, and then the consequent is the conclusion. With modus tollens, it is the consequent that is denied, and then the conclusion is the denial of the antecedent that follows from that. Here's one more quick little thing about modus tollens that sometimes is tricky, okay? Sometimes it's written in a way where the statement that you have to deny is already stated in the negative, okay? So like, let me give you this example. If I, let's see, if I take a walk, then I won't be bored. Okay, now I want you to tell me what would be the next premise if this is modus tollens. If this is going to be a correct version of modus tollens, then just, using the form that we've learned, what should be the second premise? If I take a walk, then I won't be bored. What should be that second premise? To, again, correctly express modus tollens. So I've given you the first premise, which is a hypothetical, an if A, then B statement. In this case, A is taking the walk, and B is not being bored. Okay, well, here's what I wanted to make sure that we don't do wrong, and it's okay because we're going through this. But Noah, Amanda, and Nick, notice that you say I'm not bored, right? But that's not quite correct, is it? Because the second premise of modus tollens is denying the consequent. In this case, the consequent already says I'm not bored. I won't be bored. So what's the opposite of I won't be bored? It's that I am bored, exactly. And so therefore, what's the conclusion? I did not take a walk. Yes. Now, the only thing about this that could seem a little confusing on a first look is that in the first premise, the consequent is originally stated in the negative. I would not be bored. It is not the case that I will be bored. So to deny this statement, it's a double denial. It's like I won't not be bored, and in other words, I will be. So a double negation results in the affirmative version of the statement. Like, so if I say to you, if I get into an accident, then I will not be happy. And then the next premise says, I am happy. Then you know that one thing that didn't happen is that I did not get into that accident, right? So you have to just be a little bit careful in really looking at what the consequent is. If it's stated as a negation or a denial, then the reverse of it is the affirmation of the same content, okay? So that's an easy enough mistake that some can make, and so I'm glad that I could kind of demystify and clarify that so that when you have your own homework, which is going to involve filling in examples like these from the workbook, that you would not make such an error. Okay, good. So I'm hoping that makes good sense to you guys. All right, so there's one more member of the hypothetical syllogism family, okay? And, well, we've talked about modus ponens and modus tollens. One last thing before I move to the next case. Make sure that you keep it clear in your mind the different names. I know they're kind of a little weird and maybe harder to remember, but modus ponens is the one where you affirm the antecedent. Modus tollens is the one where you deny the consequent. Sometimes I've seen students will confuse these two words and sometimes even come up with a hybrid of both, like modus pollens or modus tonens, but it's not possible to give credit for an incorrect spelling of the word because if it's a mashup of both, then I really don't know where your head is at. Did you think it was modus ponens or tollens? So let's make sure that the terminology is correct when you cite an example. Okay. Next up, and the last of the hypothetical syllogisms. So one more of these, and it's what is called the chain argument, okay? Okay, so chain argument is, again, a valid argument that uses conditionals, hypotheticals, but one difference is that it's a set of hypotheticals that are all connected as though like in a chain reaction. So here, let me give you a version of this. So first premise says, if A, then B. Second premise continues from there by saying that if B, then in that case, C. Okay, so let's see if we can follow this through to the conclusion. If A, then B. Okay, next, if B, then C. So what do you think will be our conclusion here? Now, hint, the conclusion is another if-then statement. And it's going to somehow connect elements of these two above. So with that much information given, maybe you can judge. What do you think should be the stated conclusion then? We go from if A, then B, if B, then C. Close, Danny, but backwards. Let's try again. C is what follows from B, and B is what follows from A, not the other way around. So therefore, if A, then C, yes. Okay, now the conclusion basically just does this. It joins together the antecedent clause from the first premise with the consequent clause from the final premise. In this case, A and C. So like, if I run, then I will sweat. If I sweat, then I will shower. So if I run, then I will shower. You know, if the first thing happens, then like a domino chain reaction effect, the last thing will down the line happen. So in other words, from the first event, ultimately, the final consequent will happen as well. Okay, so we can do the geography thing again. If I'm in Fullerton, then I'm in California. And if I'm in California, then I'm in the United States. So therefore, hopefully it's clear, right, that if I am in Fullerton, then I am in the United States. Think of it in terms of literal chain reactions. If the first domino falls, it will knock over the second domino. And if the second domino falls, then it will knock over the third domino. So if domino 1 falls, then so will 3. These are all just different examples of chain argument, called the chain argument because the different statements kind of are linked together as though in a chain. The next subsequent premise is linked with the previous premise by means of the consequent here becoming new antecedent. And so this argument continues until we reach the conclusion, and then it combines the first with the last part. Here's something else that I want to tell you about our hypothetical syllogism, and this goes back to a good question earlier from one of you. It was asked, are all syllogisms two premises? And the general answer is yes, but here there's a slight exception to that. I gave you an example on the board here where there are two premises that lead to the conclusion. But with the chain argument, it is possible for there to be additional premises more than two. So like, for example, suppose that this one had an additional third premise, and it said this. If C, then D. What then in that case would be the conclusion? Let's see anyone tell me on that. If A, then B. If B, then C. If C, then D. Okay, so therefore ultimately what? New question for us. The proper conclusion of this example. If A, then D. Correct, Danny, yes. Okay, so I don't know, thinking of if I study, then I will pass my class. If I pass my class, then I will graduate. And if I graduate, then I will get a great career. So if I study, then I will get a great career, you know, just as a random possible example there. Now, Noah, not exactly. I understand what you're thinking, that they lead through these steps. But the conclusion of the chain argument is just a hypothetical with two clauses, with an if clause and a then clause. and it always joins together the very first if statement at the top with the last then statement at the bottom. So in this case, there's 3 premises, and we link this with this. If there were 4, 5, 6, or whatever, you would do the same thing structurally. You would go back, link this part to the final consequent, and then that would be what you would print as your conclusion, okay? So that's the chain argument. If there's an error that I sometimes see being made with regard to this argument, the most common error is that sometimes people will not state the conclusion properly. Sometimes I've noticed people will just state it not in the hypothetical. So like, sometimes people will just say A and D, and that's not correct. This is incorrect now, because there's no if, then. So that's not the case. If I tell you that if I wake up early, then I will beat traffic, and if I beat traffic, then I will get a parking spot. So if I wake up early, then I will get a parking spot. That is a valid chain argument, but we're not actually saying that I left early. We're just saying what would happen if I did that. So the conclusion, you're not supposed to say, so I left early and I got that parking. It's all if then, all the way top to bottom. So the conclusion also has to be stated in the hypothetical, that if, for the sake of possibility, this occurred, then in that case, this would happen. Okay, so one more quick point about the hypothetical syllogism, chain argument. Okay, chain argument. Now, I told you that there's 4 forms of deductively valid argument that we're trying to learn. So we've now learned 3: modus ponens, modus tollens, and the chain argument. But there's one last, and now we'll talk about it. So the last form of deductively valid argument is not a hypothetical syllogism. It's actually called a disjunctive syllogism. So it's a different type of statement that's involved. Disjunctive syllogism. Now, a disjunctive syllogism is called that because it makes use of a type of sentence which is called a disjunction sentence. Okay, so let me tell you what a disjunction is. A disjunction is just an if-then statement or sentence. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say if-then. Please forgive me. I meant to say that it is an either-or statement. Okay, it's an either-or sentence. It's an or statement. So, for example, I will either stay in or go for a walk. This is a disjunction, and every disjunction takes this general abstract form, either A or B. For some sentences A and B. In this case, the example of A and B is that A is I will stay in, B is I will go out for a walk. What we say of the 2 parts of the disjunction is that they're called individual disjuncts. Okay, so every disjunction has 2 disjuncts, this or that. I will either have pizza or tacos for lunch. I will either major in the humanities or a STEM major. I will either go to the prom or just hang out with my friends. So these are all disjunction statements which contain 2 disjuncts. The first one is the first one that you read in the order of the sentence, and the second one is obviously the one that follows after that. Now, disjunctive syllogism is a type of valid argument form that uses that type of sentence. And here's how it looks. So it's got 2 premises. And the first premise says either A or B. So it's just a disjunction. Now, the second premise of disjunctive syllogism simply eliminates one of the disjuncts. And so it eliminates it this way by saying, for example, not A. So can you deduce the conclusion here? If we have said that either A or B, but not A, then that really leaves us with what conclusion, pretty much? Either A or B, not A though. So therefore what? then therefore B. Let's not use the word then when we state the conclusion, because then is a conditional word, but other than that, yes. Therefore, wait, hold on. Brendan, no, not B. Yes, B, because either A or B is affirmatively true, but we've eliminated that A is the one that's true. So in that case, it's B that's true, B. Like, for example, I'm either going to get pizza or tacos, but the pizza place is closed, right? Not pizza. So therefore, I will eat tacos. I will either go to the prom or hang out with my friends, but nobody asked me to the prom. So therefore, I will hang out with my friends, you see. When you have two possible cases, and it's one or the other, but we've eliminated one, then it's the other that's true, okay? So, like, say that somebody said, I'll either vote for Trump or Biden, but I'm not voting for Trump, so therefore I'm voting for Biden. It's just anything like that. We had two possible cases. One is ruled out or somehow denied, and then the other one is affirmed instead, okay? So hopefully that's making some decent sense. I could either major in the humanities or in the sciences, but I decided not to major in the humanities, so I'm majoring in science or the sciences. On and on and on. We could continue, but that's a disjunctive syllogism. Sometimes the disjunctive syllogism is known by another name as well, and that side name, I don't know why I keep doing this, my bad, but the separate name of disjunctive syllogism is argument from elimination. And it's called argument from elimination because it starts off with a disjunction and then one of the disjuncts is eliminated, and that leaves us with the other alternative as the only remaining possibility, okay? So, yeah, there's so many examples that we could come up with. I will either, let's see, study critical thinking or watch Netflix. I don't have my book or something. I'm not going to study, so I'm going to watch Netflix. Blah, 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 blah. On and on and on. Now, here, there's another possible version of this. Well, it's not a different version, but there's another way that the argument can proceed, which is also valid, okay? So in some cases, it's the other disjunct that is the one which is eliminated. And that just reverses the conclusion. Not too difficult to understand, but suppose that we have this form. Either A or B, not B. So now what's the conclusion? Let's see, you tell me that. If it's B that's been eliminated, then based on what you've learned about this type of argument, the conclusion is what? When we have either A or B and not B. Thus we conclude that what? Therefore A, correct, yeah. So let's say Jones and Smith were the only two people who were seen on video at the murder scene, like entering the building where the murder happened. So either Jones or Smith is the killer, but DNA eliminated Smith, so it must be Jones. So like it's possible to deny either of the disjuncts. The only result is that the alternative disjunct is the one that is the conclusion. Okay, so in this case, the denial that appears on premise 2 can be of whichever of the two disjuncts, as long as we consistently affirm the other member in the conclusion part. Okay, now one last thing about the disjunctive syllogism, because I've tried to mention as we've gone through this, what are typical errors that sometimes get made when these forms are being responded to in your homework and stuff. The most common error about disjunctive syllogism is when people don't negate or eliminate one of the disjuncts and instead affirm it. So this is not right. What I'm writing here is not correct. It says either A or B. And then suppose someone wrote A, so therefore not B. And I'm just telling you, no, this is not correct. The reason it's not correct is because nothing is eliminated on premise 2. Instead, we have affirmed one of the two disjuncts. And in logic, we use the word or in what's called the inclusive sense. In everyday speech, we often use the word or in a more what's called exclusive sense. So let me explain that. When you say, like, I will either go to the movies or do my homework, what you mean usually is I'm going to do one of these two things, but I will not do both. So whichever one I do, I won't do the other one. But in logic, we allow for the possibility that when you say or, it could be that you're going to do both. So like if I told you that I will either get pizza or tacos for lunch, what makes that statement false? It's only false if I'm not eating either of those two items of food. So like if you come and you see me eating sushi and you're like, wait, what happened? You told me that today you would either eat pizza or tacos, but that's sushi. And I say, yeah, well, I said something false. Now, what if you walked up to me and you saw me eating just the pizza? Okay, well, that's consistent because I said I would either have pizza or tacos. Another scenario, you come up, you see me eating the tacos. That's also consistent because I did say I would eat either pizza or tacos, and here there's tacos. But now suppose you walked up to me and you saw that on my plate there's both a piece of pizza and a taco. Does that really disqualify or falsify my original statement when I said I will either eat pizza or tacos? No. It's true that I would eat either one, and I'm eating both. So from the affirming of one of these two disjuncts, we cannot eliminate the other. But from eliminating one, we can conclude that the other one is true, because this statement is inconsistent with both disjuncts being false. So when one has been eliminated, the other one remains as certain. But from the assertion of one of the disjuncts, the negation of the other one cannot be inferred. Okay, so again, disjunctive syllogism, there has to be the word not on the second premise, eliminating one of the two disjuncts, resulting in the assertion of the other one. All right, now, with that in place, I can now tell you guys about the homework assignment that's due in a week. Okay, so officially for our class, we are using this 5th edition textbook. And the pages are a little different in that book than in the old 4th edition. So what I'm going to say first is like the official 5th edition pagination. It's so homework number 1, due, and this is also going to be sent to you as a titanium announcement. So, you know, you get a electronic copy of this that's going to stay in your records. But anyway, due Wednesday, February the 10th. And you just have to send me your submission as an email attachment anytime prior to class time, 1 p.m. Wednesday. So that's the basic rule. And here it is. It's exercise 8-3 on page 268 of the book. It's part 1. And it's letters A through J. So that's 10 exercises in this one exercise 8-3 part 1, A through J. Now here's the way that these questions are formatted in the textbook. It basically says to you this. I'm reading from the book. It says, sometimes the conclusion or one of the premises is unstated in a deductive argument, leaving you to complete the argument. Complete the following arguments using valid forms of hypothetical syllogisms and stating which form you are using. Okay, so this exercise really just drills your understanding of the 3 forms of hypothetical syllogism. I'm speaking of modus ponens, modus tollens, and the chain argument. Disjunctive syllogism isn't a part of this particular homework, and we're going to just save questions about that for future quizzes and tests and things of that kind. So anyway, it's all about the hypothetical syllogisms, and there's a set of 10 lettered examples. Now, in each of these different questions, A through J, they provide you with the parts of an argument, but with one part of it missing. Okay, so here's what your job is. You have to fully write the argument in standard form, meaning that the conclusion is at the bottom and the premises are listed above it, not occurring on the same continuous horizontal line, but after one premise, we have a break and we jump down like hitting the return key to the next available line to write the subsequent premise. So each argument's written in standard form. There's going to be one missing sentence. In many of the cases, it's the conclusion sentence that's missing. But there's at least one case where it's not the conclusion, but rather one of the premises that is missing. So you have to write the full argument, and then you also have to include within it the missing sentence that you had to supply to complete the argument. I would like you to highlight, star, or circle the missing sentence that you had to add so that I can see that you knew what it was and where it had to appear in the argument. And then you also just have to write down what type of argument this is. So, for example, let me give you a question. It's not one of the questions in the homework, but there are questions that are like this in the homework, okay? So suppose this was the question. It says, if John is angry, then he will yell. John isn't yelling. Okay? So what would be the conclusion then? That I haven't told you that's missing that you have to provide, right? Now you got to think about your knowledge of these different forms of valid hypothetical syllogism, and you have to try and assess which one of them is this one about, and according to that format, what should be the conclusion. Good. John is not angry. That's right, Hannah. And what type of argument is that? Good, good, everybody, good. You've got the right conclusion, but now we just have to finish this with one more piece of info. Which of these types of arguments is it? Modus ponens, modus tollens, chain argument. It's one of those three. It's modus tollens, correct. It's not the disjunctive syllogism, Hannah. You should know that because the word either or does not appear in the whole thing. It has the words if, then, and so it's certainly a hypothetical syllogism. Let me tell you, disjunctive syllogism is not eligible for this assignment. It's only about the other three, modus ponens, tollens, and chain argument. Like I was saying, disjunctive syllogism saving for future quizzes and tests. So yeah, it's modus tollens. Now, if this was like one of the homework questions, A through J, this would be like a perfect answer. You would star that you had to provide this additional the conclusion. You would correctly say what type of argument it is, and then you move on to the next. So there's 10 problems like that. They have to be written in standard form in this kind of fashion. You have to include and cite visually what the missing sentence was. In many cases, it's the conclusion, but in at least one, there's a missing premise. And then you have to say correctly what type of argument it is by name. Yeah, now in the text, they're written not in standard form. They're just written as prose, like a continuous piece of speech. So you have to be able to identify the missing statement, tell me what kind of argument it is, and write it like this. Also, last thing, just key to know, you can't just write the one missing sentence and say modus tollens. You have to write the full argument and place it in the proper position in the context of the full argument visually. Sometimes I've had students turn in material before incorrectly, like they just wrote, John isn't angry, modus tollens. But in that case, I don't really know. Did the student understand that this was the conclusion, or did they think it was the premise? Without having the full argument written, it's not possible for me to adjudicate what your knowledge was. So just make sure you do it in this way. How do we submit, Diego? You just send me an email with an attached file that has your document, and that's it. So it's on page 268 of 5th edition, but some of you guys I know are using that old 4th edition, and that's okay. If you are, then I just want to tell those people here that you would be looking at page 252 of edition 4. It's on page 252 of edition 4. So in case you have the older edition, that's where you would find the same exact workbook exercise. Okay, so I know we're a little over time. I'm going to let you go. One more question here, Dimitri. Professor, I have a question. Do we have to submit this digitally as a document? Yeah, you have to submit it to me, but you can handwrite it if you would like to scan your copy, as long as it's legibly written. And of course, if you wish, you can just type it out and send it to me as an electronic file. So I give you your options. It can be PDF, it can be doc file, it can be Google Docs, it can be Pages. But make sure that it's not in a format that is impossible for me to open. I would request that nobody makes me request access to your file and just send it as a standalone PDF or doc file. That's usually the best. You simply mail it to my email address, which is rvulich@fullerton.edu. For the 4th edition, it's page 252. Yeah, for the 4th edition, it's page 252. And for the current 5th edition, it is page 268. All right? So everybody, I'm going to, again, send you an even more detailed explanation of the instructions for this homework as I get into the later day. I have another class to teach right now until 3:45. But after that, I'll mail you the directions. But now you've heard them one time here in class. Yes, it will also be posted, as I was saying. Thanks. Okay, guys, have a great day then. Thanks again for all your help and support for the lecture. And have a great weekend. I guess I'll be checking in back with you guys on Monday. So until then, take care. And if you need anything in the meantime, let me know. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.